Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Art Alvarez with Mortgage Works, where we have the answers and they're on the house. Welcome to this week's Mortgage Minute. Really looking forward to this weekend, actually starting tomorrow. Why? Because of the start of what I consider probably one of the best sporting events, in the world, which is the World Series. It's going to be a great matchup with the Dodgers, of course, here from the West Coast and the New York Yankees on the East Coast. And I'm a baseball guy. And of course, I'll admit I'm a miserable baseball fan because my team is the Angels. We all know how well they did, and call me spiteful, but I'm going to root for the Yankees because since our crosstown rivals are in the series and my Angels are not, plus they took our best player. Again, call me spiteful. I'm gonna root for the Yankees, but no matter what happens, it's going to be a great series. So let me go ahead and get us to the show today. As you know, we like to start off with giving you a mortgage rate update. And, I don't have the greatest news. Rates have trended up some more. That great period of time we had in late August into early September when we were well into the fives, unfortunately, that pretty much is gone. Conforming loans are back up to the mid sixes. We're at 6.5 on a conforming 30-year fixed, again, with a decent credit score and good down payment size. And that, of course, is with no points. Those buy downs are still pretty good, though. 3.5 on a 3-2-1 first year, 4.5 on a 2-1 first year. And the government loans, FHA, VA, are still hanging on to the fives, but kind of getting just barely so because we're now in the 5.75, 5 7/8 range for FHA, VA. And then, of course, the jumbos are inching up as well, now in the mid sixes on a 30-year fix, but still, low sixes, under 6.5 on the 7/1 arm. So in terms of why we're at the rates we are right now, we always like to give you kind of an update on the bond market. Jeff's going to pull up the slide right there, the chart. This is a 5-day chart, and unfortunately, you can see that trend line is the direction we don't want to see. It was lower last Friday, and of course now it's up today to about 4.21, a remarkable increase since the Fed meeting. Right before the Fed meeting, we were at 3.6. And of course, one thing that occurs to me as Jeff and I talked about a couple of weeks ago about is there a tendency for rates yields to drop midweek? Well, not this week. Wednesday, it's up there, and it's stayed up there since. And I think probably we're going to end the week at these higher levels. So in terms of what's going on, first of all, not a huge amount of economic data points released. One thing that was released earlier in the week was the U.S. leading economic indicators. Now, that was softer, somewhat slower growth, but attributable primarily to housing and manufacturing. And so when you consider that that's the reason for that number being somewhat reflective of slower growth, I'll comment more in a little bit about why housing and manufacturing really aren't the drivers of where we're at with bond yields and mortgage rates. Housing, of course, has been soft for really a couple of years now with these mortgage rates. And by that, I mean housing sales. Housing prices continue, even in this environment, continue to still creep up more and more. But, manufacturing is now not a major part of the U.S. economy. So a slow manufacturing sector does not necessarily indicate a poor or slowing economy overall. Existing home sales, that came out this week. 14-year low in existing home sales, a remarkable number considering where home sales used to be. So again, more signs that the home market, the resale market, has been pretty soft and continues to be so. Today was the Standard & Poor's U.S. Services and Manufacturing PMI, that's Purchasing Managers Index. Both were forecast to be flat. Well, as it turns out, the services PMI actually came in stronger than expected, not flat, stronger, 55.3. Anything over 55 is considered exceptional. And of course, keep in mind, services, the service sector is about 70% of the U.S. economy. So again, that's a pretty strong signal that this economy is doing pretty darn well, despite any news to the contrary that we're heading into a recession soon and so forth. That doesn't seem to be happening. Manufacturing did even go up slightly, but again, that's a smaller part of the overall total. Next week, I call it Haunted Halloween. Of course, next week is Halloween week, next Thursday, a week from today. Next week is going to be a big week in terms of economic data. The data points that are going to be released, and this will be done later in the week. We've got GDP, third quarter gross domestic product, it's forecast to be strong, 3.4%. And then we've got the PCE, that's the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, the Fed's favorite inflation gauge. That comes out next week. And then, of course, most importantly, that jobs report, that's next Friday. And of course, remember last month's job report, that's really what drove us to these higher bond yields and therefore mortgage rates after the good news of the Fed 0.5% reduction. The jobs number just was way, way over forecast. And that, again, is why there's now this belief that the economy, in fact, is doing quite well. The labor market, despite some signs of softening, really, truly is doing quite well, too. And so as a consequence, we don't see a softening economy. There's really less talk of a recession. And that's why yields on bonds and why mortgage rates have, in fact, creeped up. So next week's going to be very interesting. Again, later part of the week when Halloween hits. Hopefully it's not haunted too much in the sense of strong economic data that's going to drive these yields and mortgage rates even higher. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring Jeff in so we can talk about, again, a little bit more about this economy and also how you can deal with it in terms of as a home buyer. Of course, it says right there on the screen, wait and hope for lower rates or leverage tools available now and save. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Art. How are you doing today?
Doing all right. How are you?
Good. So a little spiteful for the against the Dodgers, huh?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm an old guy. I haven't really been a real Dodger fan since way back when the old guys like Steve Garvey, Ron Say, Bill Russell, Davey Lopes were playing. I like the Dodgers in the 80s a bit too, but for the last several years, I've been trying to hang on to the Angels and hope they come back like they did when I was fortunate enough to attend the World Series when they won in 2002. Wow. I was at Game 6 and 7, so that was fun. I just wish we had that again, but it looks like we're a long way off.
Well, it's going to kind of be kind of fun to East Coast against the West Coast. I think it's going to get a lot of hype, and we need a break from all the political stuff going out there. We kind of need a break. So I think you hit the nail right on the head. It's one of the most exciting times. I do remember one time watching the World Series when who is it, Manny Rivera, which was an amazing closer, and this was early in his career. And I think I just became a Yankees fan at that moment, and I do love watching the series, and I'm looking forward to it. So, go Yankees!
We just need to make sure we get a 7-game series because that's always the best. Got to be a 7-game series.
Yeah. Well, and not to get too far off in the weeds, but the WNBA. Did you watch any of that?
I have watched some of that. That was very exciting. Yeah.
Wow. I did watch it game. Now they only had 5 games. They don't have a 7-game championship series, but the 5th game it went into overtime, and it was quite the show. It was just a lot of fun to see. And, it was really down to the wire. So it was a lot of fun to watch, but yeah, this whole thing with the home buyer, I kind of want to get into that and talk to you about some of those things. And really, you got a lot of people on the sidelines. I keep reading it, and then I keep reading things like, geez, it looks like maybe the 10-year is going to stay high and could go higher, which, hey, as you've taught us, that relates into long-term mortgage rates going up. So I guess, there's a few questions we want to answer today.
Okay.
So let's get into it. So the first question I have is, when it comes to the whole Fed, we thought if the Fed lowered the rates that we're going to see the interest rates go down, and yet it didn't. And now it's like, geez, are we afraid because they're going to do it again in November and December? What does it mean?
Well, the thing about it, I think hopefully now folks have come to realize from all the discussions we've had on this show about it and what we all saw in mid-September. What the Fed controls is a short-term rate. And of course, mortgages are long-term rates. Mortgage rates are. And so there's not that direct correlation. And so the narrative really has changed. It's still on the table in terms of the betting markets, the futures market, that the Fed's going to lower the Fed funds rate again in November, right after the election. So not that far off. And then another 0.25% in December. So that's another 0.5%. But what's happening is the narrative has changed because should that occur, lowering the Fed funds rate in the midst of a strong economy is considered to have more of a stimulative effect and could in fact be inflationary. And of course, the biggest enemy of the bond market and therefore mortgage rates is inflation. So it's kind of like things have been flipped on its head to where now the lowering of the Fed funds rate might also almost be considered not good news, because in the midst of this strong economy, it could be inflationary, which of course then even could drive them even further. In fact, one major investment house, T. Rowe Price, their economist department, they're smart guys in that company, are looking at the possibility of a 5% 10-year Treasury bond yield within the next 6 months. That would not be good news for mortgage rates. So let's hope that doesn't happen.
Well, I just recently read, I think it was this morning, very early, where it was talking about the main economies in the world and how the U.S. is still the strongest economy, and it said by far from any other developed nation out there. Right. And so it's again, it's that good news doesn't equal good news kind of thing. The good news is we're strong, our economy's is moving along, and so there's really no reason to lower those long-term interest rates.
Well, exactly right. And that's why, while there's still, again, that belief that we'll have that quarter in November, quarter in December, overall, though, the expectation of, we were going to have this rapid fire reduction at every Fed meeting for the next year and a half, that is off the table. Now it's pretty clear the market has accepted the fact that the Fed has said so. They're going to be cautionary. They're going to go slow. They're really going to focus on that inflation number. We've gotten a lot closer to the target, but that last little bit, it seems to be hard to reach, getting to that 2% number. And if we get more of these job reports that are strong, that's not going to help the Fed, go much faster in terms of lowering the Fed funds rate. And so as a consequence, I really would like everyone to understand and really grasp the idea that these rates where we're at now, this is going to be this way for a while. A couple of years ago, that was then, this is now. It's time to just realize this is where we're at and try to make the best of it and figure out ways how to deal with it.
Well, I think I was just looking at my notes here. It says the 10-year Treasury yield will test the 5% threshold in the next 6 months, steepening the yield curve. And this was according to Arif Hussein. And so to me, that's saying exactly what you're talking about here. We kind of better get used to a little higher interest rates. And if we plan on buying a house, the strategy is just going to be different, isn't it?
Well, exactly right. And again, part of why that prediction is even there is there's this belief. It's interesting. I've read a little bit in the financial news about, now there's a belief that depending on who wins, i.e. Trump, that could actually worsen the federal deficit, which would mean the Fed's going to have to sell more bonds to fund the government. And the problem with that is if you put a lot more supply of bonds on the marketplace to be sold, if there's not strong demand for them, then in order to get them sold, what has to happen? The yields have to go up. And then you combine that with another technical aspect called quantitative tightening that the Fed is looking to do, where I don't want to get too technical about it, but what basically means is the Fed's not going to buy as many bonds as they have in the past, because when the Fed buys bonds, that's what drives rates and bond yields down. So if the Fed is going to go with a quantitative tightening, and not be buying a lot more bonds, and if they're going to in fact sell bonds in order to fund deficit spending, that doesn't bode well for bond yields and possibly for mortgage rates.
Well, you talk about the mortgage rates and it could go up. I mean, what other factors? We've talked about the fact it's a strong economy. I mean, what other factors play into that whole thing of, I think a lot of people on the sidelines are scratching their heads going, gosh, I really thought the rates were going to come down, and yet they've just gone up. What other factors might play into that, Art?
Well, again, as I mentioned, the labor market. The labor market has not proven to be as soft as expected. And again, next Friday, it's going to be a really, really important day. That, and then the other thing is the GDP is scheduled to come out next week. The forecasts are it's going to be 3.4%, which would be an increase from second quarter. So, and it's very odd, when you consider what the news is about how a majority of the country thinks the economy is not in great shape. Well, yes and no. I mean, the economy is in great shape when you look at economic activity. There is growth. The economy is doing pretty darn well. But I think where the grumpiness comes in of the general public is the economy is not so well because everything costs more. Everything costs more, a lot more. Gasoline, although gasoline has gotten a little better the last few months, but your groceries are still real expensive. Your food bill in terms of going out to restaurants and so forth is still, the prices are much higher than they were before the pandemic. And one of the things that we're seeing, I think, is this sort of conflict between, oh, the economy's lousy, I'm worse off than I was, 4, 5, 10 years ago, but yet people are spending the money anyway. So it's like they're spending the money and they're complaining about it, but they're still spending it. And again, we're 70% a service economy, and the service sector seems to be doing just quite well, very fine. And so as a consequence, that's why I think even if the Fed lowers the Fed funds rate a couple more times this year and does it a couple, 2 or 3 or 4 times next year, that in itself should not be looked at as what you should wait for mortgage rates to fall. I think that's not a good bet. I think that's kind of a fool's game. I don't think you want to do that. So I think you need to embrace the current conditions, because some of these conditions I think are very conducive to trying to go out and buy a home now.
Well, I think about things like, that movie a long time ago called The Perfect Storm. It's when everything came together. And I think about this whole idea right now. You've talked about, the number of homes sold. It's the lowest in 14 years. The interest rates are high. The days on the market are longer. The rise of, them going up faster, the value going up faster has slowed. To me, that says, you know what? This is an opportunity. If I'm going to buy, this is a perfect storm. I mean, is that something a buyer in this environment should consider, that this is now really the time to move forward?
I think so. And it can be such a cliche. By the way, that was a great movie. I've seen that thing about 10 times. Love that movie. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it does sound like a cliche. A lot of people think, yeah, those people in real estate, they're always saying now is the best time to buy, no matter what the conditions are. And I would beg to differ that really, truly, you need to kind of open up your mind and realize, given how long we've been dealing in this environment with higher rates and higher home prices, it's, guess what, folks? This has been going on for 2, going on 3 years. You can only wait so long. There's a lot of people who need and want to buy a home. And I think, again, continuing to wait for mortgage rates to get to this magical 3 or 4% level is, again, I call it a fool's game. So, yes, what's happening is inventory is creeping up. Now, it's not back to a 6-month supply, but it's creeping up. In a lot of markets, like our market here in the Coachella Valley, there's 9 cities, the Desert Report that comes out every month, we're seeing homes selling at about 98, 97% of original list price. That's a little bit of softness. The median price here in the Valley has declined, not a great deal, but declined for 5 months in a row. And what that really means is the rate of increase in home prices has simply slowed. But what that does for a prospective home buyer is it gives you now, I think, better leverage than you've had in a long time to get out there, find a home, and negotiate some concessions in order to take advantage of these conditions and get into buying a home. And of course, what I want to talk about a little bit about here is, take that approach, be strategic, and use the temporary buy down idea in order to, get a home at a payment level you can afford, so that you can at least have that home ownership. And then as rates do eventually fall, you're going to see some pretty good appreciation in that home after you acquire it.
Well, I have a question about that. And now you might want to put on your Swami cap and pull out your crystal ball, because I think that the buy down scenario, like you're talking at the beginning, it's 3.5, right? If you go 3, 2, 1, right. I mean, come on, that gives me tingles of like, you need to be moving right now. But let's roll that out to 2-3 years from now, when the rate then, that term ends. Do you think at that point the chances of potentially locking in a lower rate by then, is that realistic?
I think so. I mean, in fact, particularly on the 3-2-1 buy down, 3 years is a long time. And I think that is a long enough time horizon that you have a reasonable chance to go ahead and find that home, get a loan that involves a 3-2-1. So you have that, using the 3.5 example, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5 schedule for that first 36 months. That gives you a reasonable timeline to be able to take advantage of rates in general falling to a point where you can refinance out of that existing loan with the buy down and get a lower note rate that hopefully will be in the 5s, or maybe if we really get lucky, in the 4s. So yeah, I think that's one of the benefits of the 3-2-1 buy down in particular, is the fact that it gives you that long of a window. And in the meantime, you're enjoying home ownership. You're going to have a much more reasonable payments schedule to be able to deal with while you're waiting for that opportunity. I think, if nothing else, it's a better approach than simply waiting on the sidelines even longer, watching those home prices still creeping up, and you're not a buyer. And then eventually, when rates do fall, and if they fall to those levels, 5, or certainly if we got into the 4s, those home prices are going to go up even more, and it could be even more out of reach, even though you're going to have a much better interest rate at that time. So in my way of thinking, the buy down strategy is a better approach. It's a win-win in regards to both of those issues. So.
Well, I'm just gonna pull this up for just a second because I think your photo here just nails it. Do we wait and hope for lower rates? Because if we wait, what seems to keep happening with the price of the homes?
They're going up.
They just keep going up. So
yeah,
that's a tricky knife to try to catch if you're juggling knives, right?
Well, exactly right. And it's another example of how the general public, consumers' expectations have basically missed the mark in 2 areas. One being, well, we're going to wait and not buy because we think rates are going to fall. And also, we're going to wait and not buy because we think these higher rates that are causing us not to want to buy should result in home prices softening and even falling. So we'll wait so that we can take advantage of what we think is eventually in the future going to be lower rates and lower home prices. Well, neither have happened. Looked like we were going that direction a month ago, but the market's reversed course and headed back up the other way. In the meantime, home prices have consistently creeped up. They haven't net gone down at all since the pandemic. And so as a consequence, these buyer expectations have missed the mark. And I think it's time, therefore, to sort of regroup and reevaluate what is going to happen in the future and take advantage of these current conditions, because they really are perfect, the perfect storm to go out there and consider buying now, especially if you need to buy a home, either because job relocation or you're cramped in an apartment, you got a couple of kids now and you need more room. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people need to buy a home right now, in addition to the fact that a lot of people just want to buy a home.
Yeah. Well, I know on the other side, it says leverage tools that are available and save. Are there other tools that that we're not talking about that you want to discuss, or do you want to just jump right into your example of your the buy down idea?
No, I think I'd like to go ahead and just jump into the buy down idea, because I think some of the numbers here that we're going to share with everybody are pretty darn compelling.
Okay.
And what I did is I came up with some scenarios here based on using a particular a home purchase scenario. And I started with some assumptions. That is a home price that's going to be $800,000. Why did I pick that number? Well, in a lot of markets, certainly here in the Coachella Valley, but other markets as well, that price level is sort of a soft spot. In other words, what I mean by that is that, for lower price homes, say 500 or less, there's pretty decent activity. Those homes tend to go faster in terms of getting sold. And then, of course, the other segment is the above $1 million. That's pretty strong. And those homes in a lot of markets tend to go pretty quick. Where things are a little bit softer, a little bit slower, longer days on market and so forth, is in that high 100s, approaching $1 million, but not quite there. So I used $800,000 with a 20% down payment, which results in a $640,000 loan amount, and using a current rate of 6.5% for a 30-year fixed. Well, your monthly principal and interest is $4,045. Now, if you're looking at a home at that price level and you got that 20% down payment, what are your options? Well, in scenario one, I'm going to give you 2 options. The most common one is if somebody thinks there's some flexibility in the price, if you will, and you're a buyer, then the most common approach is to offer something below list. Now, I call that somewhat of an uncreative option. And here's why. Now, if you offer $785,000, you're asking for a $15,000 concession. Your loan amount with 20% down is going to be lower. It's $628,000 instead of $640,000. And at that 6.5% rate, you are going to get a lower monthly payment, principal and interest of $39.69. It saves you $76 a month. That's lunch money, I call it. Not a huge savings, but that's the benefit of offering $15,000 below list. Or I would argue a better approach is offer the full price, offer 800, but you still want that 15,000 concession. Well, it turns out that 15,000 concession will pay for a 2-1 interest rate buy down. So at 800 full price offer, if you ask for 15,000 seller credit, you're still giving the seller that net of 785. But with that 15,000 credit, what you would do with your 20% down, your loan amount at 640, you can use that to fund a 2-1 buy down. So your first year interest rate's not at 6.5, it's at 4.5. And then second year at 5.5. Well, that first year payment at 4.5 is 3242. Now that's $803 lower than what you would be looking at if you just got that lower price offer with no buy down at 3969. $803 lower. Wouldn't that be much more effective, much more beneficial to the buyer and address their primary concern of high interest rates and giving them some relief on that rate and payment? I would argue yes. Now, the second scenario, and by the way, on the buy down, the 2-1 buy down scenario, the cost of a 2-1 buy down, the good rule of thumb to think about is 2.25%. That's the cost. Now that's of the loan amount, not the purchase price. So if you're putting 20% down, 2.25% of the loan amount actually is equivalent to about 1.8% concession in the purchase price. So sellers keep that in mind, that the 2.25 cost of a buy down is off the loan amount. So if the buyer puts more than 20% down, then the net cost of the seller is even lower as a percentage of their price. Now here's scenario number two. Scenario number two is you're going to try to get a larger concession. You're going to offer 765. That's 35 grand under list price of 800. 20% down, your loan amount 612. Your principal and interest is 3868. So you are going to save $177 a month versus a full price offer with no buy down. Again, that's worth something. That's pretty decent, right? But you can take a much more powerful approach. Instead, offer 800 again, offer full price, and ask for a seller concession of $35,000 as a credit towards your loan costs. Use that $35,000 to fund a 3-2-1 buy down, which is what it would cost. It would cover about that much in terms of cost. Your loan amount with 20% down, still at that 640. But look at that. Now your principal and interest the first year at 3.5%, it's not $177 lower. It's $1,171 a month lower for the first 12 months than what your payment would be at 6.5% for 640 loan amount with no buy down. Isn't that what buyers are screaming for? That is a tremendous improvement in the monthly payment. And see, the point of all this is that I think one of the things that buyers and sellers and their agents need to do is be more strategic. If you're a seller and you're contemplating a price reduction, you and your agent should talk to a lender like us and discuss the fact that you're contemplating a concession in a lower price, and ask us lenders, ask me, what can you do that'll help a buyer if we provide this concession we're considering in a lower price and using it in a different way toward the buyer's loan? Again, buyers, same thing. You and your agent, if you've got a property you're looking at and you think there's some softness in that list price, you think you can extract a concession, strategize on that. Get with your lender, get with us. Tell us how much of an offer below list you're contemplating. Let us show you how we can use those same dollars toward that buyer's loan, assuming they're getting a loan, to help them address their interest rate concern and buy down the rate. If you do that, I think it becomes a win-win for the seller. You can maybe sell your price at your existing list price without reducing it. For the buyer, you can still get those valuable concession dollars, but use them in a much more effective way to lower your monthly payment through a lower interest rate schedule for 2 to 3 years. It reminds me of back in the 80s. In the late 80s, I was up in LA County managing a mortgage branch in the San Fernando Valley, and we were originating loans in the area of Palmdale, Lancaster. There was a new construction boom going on there at the time. And my company, my branch, was a preferred lender for a home builder there called West Venture Development. One of the principals there, his name was Lou Berkowitz. And he would call me from time to time and have me go to Encino, meet with him in his office, and we would sit down and strategize. what we could do in terms of incentives to buyers on their financing to address their concerns about rates and payments and so forth. What I am encouraging buyers and sellers and their agents to do is the same thing. Get with your lenders, talk to them about the concessions that you're either going to ask for, or in terms of a lower price offer, or the concessions as a seller you're considering offering through a lower price. Get an opinion on how those dollars can be spent in a more effective way for the buyer's financing. And I think if you do that, that may help you sell more homes at a better or higher price. And with that, we're going to go ahead now. Jeff, any questions on that?
Well, I just think what you're talking about is just so obvious out there. I keep seeing homes in the marketplace almost every day. I get this little update, and almost every time it's a reduction in price. So I think again, when it's a buyer's mind or a buyer's market, you need to take advantage of it. It's a seller's market. You need to take advantage of that. I think right now is a buyer's market, and using this leverage, I think something you said is you and your boss sat down and strategized on how to make things work. And I think right now that's what it is. It's, there's always a buyer, there's always a seller. As you say, there's people who have to do these things because of that. And then there's people who want to, and they're maybe a little less motivated because they don't have to do it. But when you give them the strategy to do it, like a buy down, it makes it so much easier, doesn't it?
Well, I think so. But again, there's this perception, I think, among buyers, sellers, and their agents that, it's a little bit more complicated. And, some folks don't feel comfortable with all these numbers. And even though these numbers, in my opinion, are so darn compelling to that buyer who's financing their home purchase, it would be, in my mind, kind of criminal. If I was selling homes, I would not want to just make a lower price offer if I'm being told by my buyer, I want to submit 15 or 20 or $25,000 below the list price. First thing I would do if I was their buyer agent is I'd be finding out, well, who are we going to use as the lender for this? Let's talk to them about how we can use those dollars more effectively to help you with the buyer with what is your biggest concern. We read it all over the place. It's in the news constantly. High rates are, upsetting people, and they have been for a long time. We can address that with these seller dollars, and we can do so much more effectively for the buyer if we get those dollars for something like this buy down strategy rather than just off the price.
I think that's brilliant. You've given us a couple of examples here, or using these assumptions. What about a house that's maybe in the $500,000 to $600,000 price range? Are we seeing these same types of savings? In percentages that we can expect here as we're seeing an $800,000 home?
Oh, yeah, of course it's relative. Obviously, a lower price level is going to mean a little bit less than monthly payment savings, but the overall principle remains the same. And by the way, on that 3-to-1 buy down, the rule of thumb in terms of the cost of the buy down is about 4.5% of the loan amount. And again, when you consider that a 20% down, 4.5% of the loan amount probably means more like 3.75% of the purchase price. But the same principle applies. If it's a $600,000 house, and I've done a couple of those not long ago, it was a $600,000 house, and the monthly payment savings wasn't $800 and almost $1,200, but it was $700 and like $1,000. So yeah, this works very well at that $600, $500, even a $400,000 price level. Again, it's relative given the price level is lower that you're starting with, but the payment savings are still tremendous and very compelling.
Well, I think it's great. I put your information on the screen, 760-969-5023 or art@mwloan.com. This is the guy you want to strategize with. If you're not sure, you and your significant other, if it's you by yourself, whoever, give Art a call. And as his slogan says, he has the answers and they're on the house. And you can talk about, hey, what is your scenario and how can you use some of the tools that are available today that maybe, I don't mean this negatively, maybe your agent is not aware of, that could help you get in your home. Or let's face it, if you're thinking about selling your home, they could help you sell your home faster as well. So it's almost like he's a matchmaker. He can put this thing together. So Art, thank you so much. This is great.
Sure. Thank you, Jeff.
All right.
Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and go to our closing question from last week. It was a pretty interesting one. Here it is. I've heard there's a mortgage called a bridge loan that can help a homeowner close a purchase without selling their current home first. How does it work? And yes, I joked about this question last week where I did point out this doesn't mean that we offer loans for somebody who wants to buy a bridge. But what it does do, it's a very good and creative solution for what I call the contingent offer problem. As many of you know, in most major markets, even today with the market has shifted a little bit, buyers do have more leverage. It's still very difficult if you own a home that you're going to sell, but you identify a home you want to buy and you want to be able to complete that purchase without getting your current home sold first. A bridge loan is a great tool to make that happen. And now the idea is, first of all, yes, you're going to be selling your current home. So your cash for down payment and closing costs is going to be coming from your sale proceeds. But what the bridge loan allows you to do, it allows for financing the home purchase without selling that current home first. So then you say, well, that's where my down payment and closing costs are coming from. So how do I address that? I don't have that money sitting somewhere else. Well, what it does require is that you have significant equity in your current home that you're selling, or you have maybe a good amount of equity in the home you're selling, and perhaps you have other real estate, maybe a couple of rental properties or a second home with equity as well, good equity, so that a bridge loan in those circumstances can be cross-collateralized among multiple properties. I've got one right now that we're finishing up. A home buyer wanted to complete a purchase of a home that was about $1.4 million. And he had a home to sell. It's listed for sale, plus he had a second home. What we were able to arrange is a bridge loan that basically was secured by the home he was buying, the home he was selling, and his second home. And between those three properties, we were able to give him a total loan amount to complete that $1.4 million purchase. The total loan amount financed was $1.3 million. So ultimately what that meant was this buyer is able to close on the purchase while his current home's listed for sale, and he's financing about over 90% of the $1.4 million purchase price. So the amount of money he has to contribute to complete that purchase while still listing his home for sale was less than 10% of the transaction. That's a terrific outcome. Now, these loans are expensive. I'm not going to deny that. Typically, the rates are close to double digit. They can sometimes be 9.99, 10%, even 11%, depending on the credit score. They are short-term loans, typically a 12-month term. During that period, the payments are interest only. The loans do not have prepayment penalties. Why? The lender wants to get paid off as quick as possible. Now, again, as I mentioned, they have higher rates, higher fees. There are points involved. In fact, the lender makes their income predominantly off the points on the bridge loan, not off the interest yield, because the loan's not going to be in place long enough for them to really make much of a profit off the interest yield. So that's why for bridge loans, you do see points involved. That's where the lender makes the money. And again, you have to think of it in terms of this gives you that opportunity to have your cake and eat it too. You've identified a home you want to buy. You don't want it to get away from you because you have a home to sell. You don't think the seller is going to be willing to accept a contingent offer from you. So you've got to find a solution. The bridge loan is perfect for that. And again, as I mentioned, you have the potential, depending on equity in your current home, and if you have other real estate, you have the potential to get somewhere near or maybe even up to 100% financing when you use the bridge loan strategy. So it's a great tool. I do a few every year. So if anybody, you're in a position where you've got a lot of equity on a home that you're selling, but you've identified a home you want to buy and you don't want that to lose that opportunity, give me a call and I can help you, give you the numbers to show you how to structure a bridge loan option to get that purchase completed while you're selling your current home. So great question. I hope that answers most of your questions. If you have any more information you need on a bridge loan, please call me or email me. I'd be happy to give you some numbers and help you find your way with that strategy. And with that, we'll go to our closing question for next week. Here it is. It's a pretty excellent question, actually. We do run into this from time to time. I've got substantial liquid assets, but limited monthly income. To qualify to buy a home, I'm told that asset depletion can help. How does that work? Again, very good question. And next week, I will have the answer to that question and it'll be on the house. So in the meantime, thank you for watching and listening to this week's Mortgage Minute. My name is Art Alvarez with Mortgage Works, where we have the answers and they're on the house. Have a good weekend. Enjoy that World Series, and we'll see you next week. So long. Take care.